Introduce our first speaker, which will be Caleb Maupin. He's a founder of Baldwin Wallace Fisk. He's studying political science, and he is going to speak on the topic of what I did for my summer vacation. And basically, a quick introduction, he went to Detroit and interned with the Moratorium Now Coalition, where they literally put people back in their homes with many different methods to stop evictions and foreclosures. And so Caleb.
Well, I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm happy that everyone is here. I thank you all for coming. And I wanted to basically talk about, I was in Detroit from the beginning of May until the end of August. And what I did is I worked for a coalition called Moratorium Now to stop foreclosures and evictions. And the basic goal of the group was to pass a Senate bill. We actually had a bill introduced called Senate Bill SB 1306. What the bill would do is it would put a halt on home foreclosures. It would make it so everyone had 2 years before their home could be foreclosed. There would be a 2-year stay on all the foreclosures in all the state of Michigan. And now during that 2 years, then you would still have to make payments, but the payments would be set by a judge, and they'd be based on what you could afford, actually. And a judge would set a reasonable payment as opposed to the adjustable rate mortgage payment, which goes up really high. And it would take the payment out of the hands of the judge, or out of the hands of the courts, or not the courts. It would put it into the hands of the judge, put it into the hands of the courts, and take it out of the hands of these greedy mortgage companies that are using it to take people's homes, essentially. And the bill, they started out in Detroit. They were just trying to approach the governor and get the governor to declare a moratorium, and they began with that, and one thing led to another, and they met with a local state representative, and he actually introduced the bill, and it was a state bill in the State House of Representatives, SB 1306. And we got involved in a lot of struggles, and one particular struggle we got involved with was the case of Ruby Curl Pinkins. And the thing with that was, anyone who thinks that you can't fight against these big corporations, and you can't fight against these banks, and you can't win, needs to really hear about this case of Ruby Curl Pinkins, because a victory was won in that case, and a few, I said it before, 100 people with picket signs actually beat the biggest bank in this country at that time. And what it was this woman, Ruby Curl Pinkins, was an elderly woman who had been who had lost her home. She had taken out an adjustable rate mortgage to get her home, and what you have is you have your redemption period where you miss a payment, and then you have the time you can actually pay the whole thing. If you could somehow come up with the money to pay for the whole thing, you can stay in your home by law. Well, they came up with the money to pay for the whole thing, and the company sent them their check back in the mail and said, we're not going to take it. And they said, apparently there was some loophole in the contract that you could do that. If they could just send her check back. They didn't want her check, they wanted her home. And so a friend of the attorney we worked with, Jerry Goldberg, a friend of his was the attorney representing the case, and we went to her house, and we got involved with many organizations. There was Acorn was involved. We're very small. They were not as involved as other groups. There's a group called Call Them Out, which is locally in Detroit. And then there was the Coalition to Stop Foreclosures and Evictions. There was the Michigan Emergency Committee Against War and Injustice, and we had a demonstration at our house of about 100 people. And it was the top story on the news that evening. And then the next Monday, we planned at that demonstration that on the next Monday we would have a meeting of a protest in front of the bank. It was Bank of America. We had just bought out Countrywide, and Countrywide was the one responsible. So during the day, we had 50 people come and picket the bank. And I remember that demonstration was rather interesting because the police showed up at the demo and tried to shut it down, but we had Jerry Goldberg there, who was a lawyer, and they said, you can't do this is illegal, and Jerry cited the law that said exactly that they could do this. And instead of us dispersing, as soon as Ms. Pinkins pulled up, and she was a disabled woman in a wheelchair, and she pulled up, and they saw this woman who the bank was in, it just looked really bad, and the cops dispersed. So the cops went home, and we did not. And it was great, and that also made the news. And at that point, with all the bad publicity, the company, they gave in, and Ms. Pinkins is in her home. And it was victorious. And it shows that you can defeat these corporations if you fight hard enough and if you resist. I mean, you can actually have an impact. There there are other instances where there was a woman who was being foreclosed on, who, I mean, she wasn't being she was a renter, and so one day she just woke up. There was a knock on her door. She opens the door, and the sheriff says, "You got to be out in 2 hours because we're foreclosing." And she said, "Well, what do you mean? I'm a renter." And she said, "Well, the owner's been foreclosed on," and she had no idea. And I remember we went there, and we went with there were some other community organizations. We went to the home, and we were there. And as the bailiffs were there to come, we held them there, and we're talking, trying to stop the bailiffs. And they were saying, we got to do our job, get out of the way. And it was kind of a confrontational situation. There was a guy there named Alan who had a camera, and he was just snapping pictures of them, and that drove them crazy. They're like, "Don't take our picture!" They were able to. We had some friends there who had a connection with a more liberal judge in town. And they were able to put a stay on it, and that woman was able to at least get her stuff out instead of having it thrown out in the street by the bailiffs. But it's the foreclosures are so bad in Detroit. It's like walking through New Orleans. You see so many houses that are destroyed, so many houses that are just empty and falling apart. And it's just, and it's almost like a natural disaster there, except it's a man-made disaster made by the greed of these bankers and these corporations that don't care about you and they don't care about me. They just care about making a profit. And if you really look at it, stopping home foreclosures is in a way a demand that really can stand up to the whole basis of the problem, of the greed. You're saying that the right of a person to stay in their home trumps the right of banks to make money, trumps the right of that. And I think that could actually lead to a whole different kind of society if we had, when we start saying that people's right to live trumps the right of people to make money, and people's right to have a home to live in and a house over their head trumps the right of corporations and all of that to get richer off our backs and all of that. I think it's a transition, a transition to a much better society that I think we'd all like to live in. So that was my experience in Detroit, and I hope we can get something like that going here in Cleveland, because the biggest lie out there is that nothing changes. That's the biggest lie, is that there's nothing you can do. There's plenty we can do. In the 1930s, some great historic things were won because people took action. And there were people that were basically up against a wall with an economic crisis like we are right now, where the banks, the whole thing had collapsed, and there was nothing else they could do but get involved and take action. That's what we got to do. We got to get people in the streets, and we got to get involved. So, thank you.